Hey there, before I get into this week's video, I just have 3 really quick channel announcements that I want to make. The first of those is that as of today, as of filming this video, the channel has officially hit 50,000 subscribers, which is an absolutely insane number. I didn't think I would be hitting that anytime soon. I only started the channel last year, so I posted the very first video February of 2022. And it's all because of you guys. So thank you so much for coming back each week and watching the videos that I make. As long as you guys keep showing up and watching the videos, I will continue to make them. The second thing, and this has been something that's been requested by so many of you guys, I made a playlist called All Lessons in Order. And basically what I've done is I've taken all of the guitar lessons on my channel and I've put them in a specific order that I would recommend watching them in. So if you're not sure where to go next after watching one of my videos, or maybe you're recommending the channel to somebody or something like that, that's gonna be a great resource and it's really gonna help keep you pointed in the right direction. Now for announcement number 3, I've decided that it would be a good idea to start creating downloadable workbooks or just PDF pages to go along with each one of my lessons on YouTube. So these will include things like chord charts, fretboard diagrams, tabs, and other important notes to go along with each lesson. These will be available exclusively on Patreon and to my YouTube members. And moving forward, every single one of these lessons will have a downloadable PDF, but also I'm going to be creating them for the lessons that I've done in the past. So even the ones going back as far as a year, it might take a little bit of time, but I will be prioritizing probably the ones that are the most popular. If you do want to grab access to those, I will make sure to have my Patreon and also my YouTube membership linked down below. It's just a few dollars to sign up and it goes a really long way in helping support the channel here on YouTube. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's get into the lesson. So what we are talking about today is chord progressions, and specifically how to come up with or create your own chord progressions. And this is obviously essential for songwriters. So if you want to start writing songs, this is super important, but also if maybe you use a looping pedal and you want to be able to loop some chords behind your soloing, your improvisation practice, this can go a really long way there as well. Okay, so I'm going to go through the theory pretty quickly because I've covered this 100 times in other videos. If you need like the slow motion version with more details, I'll make sure to link a video of that down below in the description. So check that out if you need it. But let's start off with what is a key, because every time we play a chord progression, we are operating inside of a key. And basically all we're doing when we're looking at a key is essentially pulling our notes from a corresponding major scale. So the key of C major, it just lines up with the C major scale. The key of D major lines up with the D major scale. I'm going to talk about minor scales and minor keys in a minute, but we're going to focus on major for now because that's going to be a little bit easier. So let's take the key of C major. It's going to come from the C major scale. So it's going to contain only notes from the C major scale, which the notes are C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. Now, every single chord inside the key of C major is only going to be using groups of these 7 notes. And what we do now is we number each note in the scale. So if I were to play a C major scale, it would sound like this. And those notes are C, D, before we go back to C. So when we're applying the numbers, it's pretty straightforward. We've got C, which is 1, D, which is 2, E, which is 3, F, which is 4, G, which is 5, A, which is 6, then we've got B, which is 7, before returning back to the C, which is our 1. Now, the reason these numbers are so important is because they're going to tell us which chords inside this key are major and which are minor through something called the major-minor formula. So each one of these notes is going to have a corresponding chord, right? We're going to have a C chord, a D chord, an E chord, an F chord, G, etc. But through the major-minor formula, we know which ones are major and which ones are minor. So 1, 4, and 5 are always going to be major chords. 2, 3, and 6 are always going to be minor chords, and then that 7th chord is going to be diminished. Now I go into the theory of what makes these chords major or minor in another video and why the 1, 4, and 5 are always major and the 2, 3, and 6 are always minor. So I'll make sure to link that video below. But all you need to know for the sake of what we're doing today is that the 1, 4, and 5 are always major and the 2, 3, and 6 are always minor, and that 7th chord is going to always be diminished. So now once we've applied this formula, we get all of our chords that occur inside of this key. So we've got C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, Then we've got a B diminished before returning to our C major. And all of these chords are simply just rearranging groups of notes from the C major scale. That's why they all sound so nice together. Now we're gonna go over this same idea in another key. G major is a great one because a lot of people know how to play in the key of G major. And we're gonna do the same thing. So we're gonna take a G major scale and we're gonna find all those notes first. So in a G major scale, we have G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp. So that's the one kind of funny note in there before returning back to a G. And this is just following do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, starting on a G note. So if I were to play a G major scale, now we would do the exact same thing and we would number all of these notes in the scale. So we'd have G as our 1, then we'd have A as our 2, then we'd have B as our 3, C as our 4, D as our 5, then we'd have an E as our 6, an F sharp would be our 7, before returning back to the G, which is our 1. And that major minor formula gets applied in the exact same way. So the 1, 4, and the 5 are going to be major chords, the 2, 3, 6 are going to be minor chords, and then that 7th chord is going to be a diminished chord. And if I play through these chords in order, your ear should tell you that all of these chords come from the same key. They all sound like they should be played together. So we've got G major, A minor, B minor, C major, D major, E minor. We've got our F sharp diminished before returning back to our G major. Now, if you think about both of the keys we've talked about, the key of G major and the key of C major, is they actually share a lot of chords, right? C major, G major, A minor, and E minor, they both exist inside of both keys. However, because these chords are a different number, for example, in the key of G major, a C major is the 4 chord. Whereas in the key of C major, it's the 1 chord. And essentially what it's doing is the chord is operating and doing something different in the different key, right? Because they're obviously not the exact same thing because there's no F major chord inside the key of G major, right? There's no D major chord inside the key of C major. So even though they share chords, they're operating differently. They're doing different things. And realistically, if you want to do the same thing in 2 different keys, it's not about finding the chords that are the same, it's about lining up the numbers. So what I mean by that is if I were to play the 4 chord, the 6 chord, and then the 1 chord, not thinking about what those chords are, but thinking about the numbers, that will give us the same chord progression, just in different keys. So the 4 chord in G major is a C. I'm gonna play with bar chords here because it's easier to illustrate. Then we go to the 6 chord, right? And then we go to the 1 chord. Now I can play the exact same chord progression in a different key, so in the key of C major. Instead of our C chord being our 4, it's now our F chord. So now we'd have this. 6 chord. And if I played that whole thing in G major again, your ear should kind of be telling you that essentially those chord progressions are just the same thing played in different keys. Now, this would be the same no matter what key I wanted to play in. I could play in the key of E flat major, and it'd be the same thing. If I played the 4, the 6, and the 1, the chord progression would be the same, just in a new key. This whole concept is called the Nashville number system, and it's a very magical way of looking at the guitar, and other instruments do this too, but essentially seeing chords as how they operate in a key. So we would say a 4, 6, 1 in the key of C major, or a 4, 6, 1 in the key of G major. And no matter what key you decide you want to play in, these chords are going to operate the same way, just within that new key. Now, it's important to talk about minor keys. And the way that we look at it is through something called relative minor keys. And things can get a little bit confusing here, but I promise it's very, very simple. I do a deep dive on keys, so major keys and minor keys, as well as modes, because essentially those are working the same way. In another video, again, I will make sure to have that linked below. But basically what we talk about is relative scales. And basically what that is, we're gonna have a relative major key and a relative minor key. They're gonna be related to each other. And all we have to do to find these is go to the 6th note of our major scale. So in the key of C, C, D, E, F, G, A is our 6th note. And if we play this exact same scale, okay, a C major scale, starting on an A note, instead of starting on a C note, we would be playing an A minor scale. It's all about that 6th note. The same thing would be if we were in the key of G major and we went all the way to the 6th note. And if we played up the scale from an E, we would be playing an E minor scale. In both cases, the notes would be the same. So G major and E minor are the exact same notes, just starting at a different point in the scale. The same thing would be C major and A minor. They're the exact same notes. They contain all the same notes. They contain all the same chords because all the notes are the same. They're just starting at a different point in the scale. Now, musically, it's a little bit different. When you are playing a chord progression, there's going to be a natural kind of home that the chord progression is pulling towards. In many cases, that is going to be that 1 chord, or it's going to be that 6th chord. So when I'm playing in C major, it's going to be that the C major chord, the 1 chord, is my home. I'm going to be resolving to it. It's going to feel like it's leading me there. Whereas in the key of A minor, even though it's all the same chords that are allowed to be played, if it feels like it's pulling me back to A minor and that's where it wants to resolve, well, then I am in the key of A minor. Now, what you're supposed to do here is you're actually supposed to renumber everything. So when you're in C major, the C is the 1. But when you're in A minor, you would technically want that A minor chord to be the 1 chord in the key of A minor. So even though all the notes are the same, all the numbers get shifted over. What I like to do is just always relate everything back to the relative major key. So even when I'm playing in the key of A minor, for example, and it wants to resolve to that A minor chord, well, I'm still going to say this is the 6th chord of C major rather than the 1 chord of A minor. And that just keeps things a little bit more aligned in my brain. We're not going to worry about the semantics of it, at least right now as you're learning. Down the road, you can kind of start being more specific. But ultimately, as far as communication goes, relating everything back to that major key is going to make things a lot easier. Okay, so now that you kind of know how keys work and how chords can be the same but operate differently depending on the key that they're in, what we're going to talk about now is actually creating chord progressions and coming up with your own chord progressions. And doing this is actually incredibly easy if you understand how keys work. And that's because every single chord that we've laid out from within the key occurs naturally, which means that they all are just going to always sound good together. So what that means is you can take any group of chords that are in the same key and just make up a chord progression with it. Now, a very important thing to note, however, is that at least in my experience and in the type of music that I really like to play, the 1, 4, 5, and 6 chords are by far going to be the most stable. They're going to feel the easiest to work with. You're going to have the most freedom to kind of create melodies over, whether you're singing along to them or soloing over them. They're going to be the easiest ones to work with. So the 1, the 4, the 5, and the 6. So what I'd recommend is starting with those chords and building your progressions from those first. For example, one of the most popular chord progressions of all time is a 1, 5, 6, 4. Now, if I were to play a 1, 5, 6, 4 in the key of G major, my 1 chord would be a G major, my 5 chord would be a D major, my 6 chord would be an E minor, and then my 4 chord would be a C major. And that would sound like this if I played it. There's actually a really great video on YouTube by a comedy music group called Axis of Awesome. And they basically take that chord progression, the 1, 5, 6, 4, and they sing a whole bunch of songs over the exact same chord progression because this chord progression is used so much for so many different sounding songs. It's honestly amazing. I really recommend watching it. I'll make sure to add a link below so that you can check it out if you want to because it's hilarious. But the idea is because these chords are so stable and so easy to use, it's very easy to come up with a million different ideas that work over them. So alternatively, we can do a totally different chord progression. We could do something like a 6, 4, 1, 5, which would sound like this. or honestly any other combination of those 4 chords from the key, it's gonna sound good no matter what you do. Now, once you start feeling comfortable coming up with different combinations using those chords, I'd recommend getting into using the 2 and the 3, also incredibly commonly used chords, but they just kind of have a little bit more going on. For example, I could play something like a 4-1-5-2, which would sound like this. What I'm showing you here is just examples. You do not need to copy what I'm doing at all. All I'm trying to say is that you can take any one of those chords that exist naturally inside the key, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 chords, and just start coming up with random things, random combinations of those chords. One thing I will say is the 7 chord is a lot harder to use just because the way it operates inside of the key. It's always gonna feel like it's leading back to the 1 chord. So play around with it and see if you can come up with something that you like the sound of, but you're gonna have an easier time coming up with catchy or poppier kind of chord progressions using the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 and different combinations of those. And you can do this in any key you want. You don't have to do this in the key of G major. You don't have to do this in the key of C major. You can do this in any key that you're comfortable with. I've only picked those because there's a lot of open chords associated, which makes it a lot easier. But if you've watched my video about chord roadmaps, which is something that's super important to me in the way that I play, you can apply this there too. So I'm not gonna go and explain it in this video. Again, it'll be linked below if you wanna learn about chord roadmaps, but basically it allows you to play in any key using bar chords. So if you're comfortable with bar chords, you can do that. So if you wanted to play in a key like B flat major, which is basically all bar chords, you can do that. And then you can understand the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 chords, where they are, and you can start coming up with chord progressions in that key. If you're new to this whole concept and idea, I'd recommend experimenting with both the keys of G major and C major first, really getting used to building chord progressions with both of those keys. If you have a pen and paper in front of you, it'd be really helpful to kind of write out the scale and then write out the numbers for each note and then write out whether they're major or minor below that so that you can kind of see key of G major. It has all of these chords in it. And then you can go through and kind of start picking it out from that where it's right in front of you. Kind of makes it a little bit easier to understand what's going on. And then as you feel more confident, if you feel like you've locked in a chord progression that you really like, let's say you really like a 6-4-1-5, that's like your favorite chord progression, you'd want to start trying to play a 6-4-1-5 in a different key. So if you come up with that in the key of G major, put it in the key of C major, write everything down so you can see all of the notes and their numbers and whether they're major or minor so that you can kind of pick those out and play those chords. But then you would know a 6-4-1-5 in G major is the same thing as. You can see there are even a couple shared chords there that operate totally different, but if you're using your ears, you can tell they're the same chord progression. So just because you come up with a chord progression that you like, it doesn't mean that it has to stay that way for the whole song. So a lot of times there'll maybe be a verse chord progression and then it will change in the chorus and you'll have a different chord progression in the chorus. And those chord progressions typically are just gonna be 2 different progressions from the same key. They might start on totally different chords from the key. You might have a 6-4-1-5 for the verse, and it might go to a 1-5-6-4 in the chorus. But something else that you can start throwing in there is you can start changing things within the progression. So a chord progression doesn't have to stay the same way. Let's say it's in the verse of a song. It doesn't have to stay cycling those 4 chords over and over. At the end of the verse, you can change it. You can throw something new in there. A quick little example that I can show you is if I were to play in the key of G major, I'm gonna play a C major to a D major to an E minor. It's an E minor 7 technically, but it's the same thing as an E minor. And then I'm gonna go back down to a D major. So that would be a 4, 5, 6, 5 in the key of G major. But what I can do I'm gonna replace one of those chords with a 1. It's a G. So I'm gonna go back to the 5. Now instead of the 5 here, go on the 1. So you can hear every time I cycled that progression, I'm switching it up a little bit, and it just keeps things interesting. A lot of times you might even hear the last time through a chord progression, it just holds on one chord. So you're playing the same cycle, and then maybe you get towards the end of the verse, and then it's just gonna hold on the 5 chord. Before going into the new chord progression in the chorus or things like that. The idea is that you just don't have to be stuck cycling the same chords all the time, as long as they're being pulled from the same key. Okay, so that's gonna be it for today's lesson. If you have any questions, please make sure you leave them down in the comments below. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. And please also consider subscribing to the channel here on YouTube. I release a new guitar video just like this one every single week. If you guys do want the downloadable PDF that goes along with this lesson, there'll be links at the top of my description to both my Patreon and the YouTube membership. It's totally up to you which one you want to go for, but you'll be able to find all the resources there. With all that said, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.